In the stifling heat of a midsummer night, 5 friends gathered in the musty basement of an old Victorian house. The air hung heavy with the scent of stale beer and greasy pizza, a stark contrast to the palpable excitement radiating from Ethan, the group's self-proclaimed thrill-seeker. Ethan's eyes gleamed with mischievous delight as he rummaged through a battered cardboard box. "You won't believe the shit I found at this creepy yard sale," he grinned, pulling out a wooden case that seemed to absorb the dim light around it. The others, Zoe, Marcus, Olivia, and Caleb, leaned in, curiosity overcoming their initial disinterest. As Ethan opened the box, a fetid odor wafted out, making them recoil in disgust. "Jesus fuck, Ethan, what died in there?" Zoe exclaimed, her nose wrinkling in revulsion. "It's called the game of flesh," Ethan explained, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "The old hag who sold it to me said it's been in her family 4 generations. Supposedly, it's cursed." Marcus snorted, reaching for another beer to mask his unease. "Cursed? Come on, man. That's some grader bullshit right there." But as they examined the game more closely, an oppressive silence fell over the group. The leather board felt wrong. Too warm, too supple, as if it might twitch beneath their fingertips at any moment. And those bone pieces? Were those tiny teeth marks etched into their surface? Olivia's voice quavered as she spoke. "I don't know about this. Maybe we should play something else." "Don't be such a wuss," Caleb laughed, though the sound rang hollow in the oppressive basement air. "It's just a fucking game, right?" As Ethan began to read the rules, the very air seemed to thicken, pressing down on them with an almost tangible weight. The lone light bulb flickered, casting monstrous shadows across their faces. Each word Ethan spoke felt like a nail being driven into a coffin. The rules were deceptively simple, yet deeply disturbing. Players moved around the board, drawing cards that challenged them to perform increasingly twisted tasks. The winner would be the first to reach the center, a spot ominously labeled the maw. With each roll of the dice, each card drawn, the friends felt a growing sense of unease blossom into full-blown terror. The first few rounds were tame enough, stupid dares, embarrassing confessions. But as the game progressed, as if feeding off their discomfort, things took a sinister turn. "What the actual fuck?" Zoe gasped, her face pale as she read her card. "It says I have to cut off a lock of my hair and burn it." The acrid scent of burning hair filled the room, making them gag. But underneath it was another smell, the metallic tang of fresh blood. "Guys," Marcus said, his voice trembling, "I think I'm bleeding." He held up his hand, revealing a thin cut across his palm. None of them had seen it happen. None of them could explain it. "This is fucked up," Caleb muttered, sweat beading on his forehead. "We should stop. We need to stop." But they couldn't stop. Some unseen force compelled them to keep playing, to keep drawing cards, to keep moving closer to the maw. It was as if the game had sunk invisible hooks into their very souls, reeling them in with each passing moment. The room began to change around them, reality warping like a reflection in a funhouse mirror. The walls seemed to pulse and writhe, as if alive. The leather game board glistened weightly, and they could have sworn they saw it twitch, hungry for more. Olivia, tears streaming down her face, smashed her prized guitar to splinters. Ethan, retching violently, forced himself to swallow a live morph that had appeared from nowhere. Caleb screamed in agony as invisible teeth seemed to gnaw at his flesh, leaving bloody furrows in their wake. "I can't do this anymore," Zoe whimpered, reaching out to move her piece off the board. The moment her fingers touched the bone token, she shrieked in pure agony. Her hand fused to the piece, flesh melting and merging with the yellowed bone in a grotesque union. "Holy shit! Holy fucking shit!" Marcus yelled, jumping up from the table. But as he tried to run, he found his feet rooted to the floor. Tendrils of something that looked disturbingly like sinew had grown up around his ankles, binding him in place. They were trapped in a game that was rapidly becoming all too real, all too hungry. Ethan's turn came again. With trembling hands, he drew a card. As he read it, all color drained from his face, leaving him ashen and hollow-eyed. "What?" Caleb demanded, his voice cracking with fear. "What does it say?" Ethan swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing like a man approaching the gallows. "It says, the hunger grows, feed it, or be fed upon. Carve a pound of flesh from the player to your left." All eyes turned to Olivia, who sat frozen in horror to Ethan's left, but Ethan's eyes had gone glassy, unfocused. He reached for the knife they'd used to cut the pizza, its blade now wickedly sharp and gleaming with malevolent purpose. "I'm sorry," he mumbled, tears streaming down his face. "I have to. It's the rules. It's the fucking rules." Olivia's screams echoed through the basement as Ethan began to cut. The others watched in helpless revulsion, unable to look away, unable to stop the horror unfolding before them. Blood flowed freely, soaking into the game board. But instead of staining the leather, it seemed to be absorbed, the board growing plumper, more vibrant with each crimson drop. When it was over, Olivia slumped in her chair, pale and shaking, her eyes wide with shock. The chunk of flesh Ethan had carved from her thigh sat on the table, quivering slightly as if still alive. "Now what?" Zoe asked, her voice barely audible, cracking with terror. As if in answer, the flesh began to move. It pulsed, stretched, and then transformed. In seconds, it had reshaped itself into a new game piece, wet and glistening in the sickly light. "Oh God," Marcus gagged, bile rising in his throat. It's waiting for Olivia to use it." Weeping silently, Olivia reached out with her trembling hand and placed the piece that had once been part of her own body, onto the board. As it touched the leather surface, a visible shudder ran through the entire room. The game continued, growing more grotesque with each passing moment. The players were forced to mutilate themselves and each other, to consume vile substances, to confess their darkest secrets. And always, the board grew larger, hungrier, more alive. Caleb was the first to reach the moor. As his piece crossed the threshold, a look of ecstasy crossed his face. "I can see it now," he breathed, his eyes wide with a mixture of terror and rapture. "It's beautiful. It's everything." Then he began to change. His flesh rippled and flowed like melting wax. In seconds, he had been absorbed into the game board itself, his features still visible in the patchwork leather, frozen in a rictus of pleasure and pain. One by one, the others followed, Marcus, then Zoe, then Olivia, each drawn into the moor, becoming one with the obscene tapestry of flesh and bone that the game had become. Finally, only Ethan remained. He stared at the board, now grown to cover the entire table, pulsing with a life of its own, with a mixture of terror and longing. "I won," he whispered, his voice hoarse from screaming. "I'm the last one left. That means I won, right? Please, God, tell me I won." But the game wasn't finished. Not yet. Never. The walls of the basement began to stretch and warp. The ceiling sagged downward like a bloated belly. And everywhere, the texture of the room began to change. Wood and concrete gave way to something organic, something alive. Ethan screamed as he realized the terrible truth. The basement, the house, perhaps the entire world had become the game board. And he was just another piece to be played, to be consumed, to be absorbed into this nightmare made flesh. As the pulsating walls closed in around him, Ethan had one final, terrible thought. Somewhere out there, on a cosmic scale he couldn't comprehend, giant fingers were moving him into the moor. In his last moments of sanity, as his flesh began to meld with the all-consuming game, Ethan understood the true nature of the curse. It wasn't about winning or losing. It was about feeding something ancient, something hungry, something that would never, ever stop. The game of flesh had claimed 5 more victims, but its appetite was far from sated. In the empty house, in the now silent basement, the wooden box sat waiting for the next group of players to open it, to set up the board, to take their turn. After all, in the game of flesh, everyone gets to play, whether they want to or not.